So I think this is definitely something where societies that want to take kind of a bigger role in their field and be like, visionary and bring and advance the field can shine a bit.
Welcome to the Reproducibility Podcast, an open science podcast featuring early career researchers. I'm William Nyam, a postdoc from the University of Chicago, which is on the lands of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Miami, and Potawatomi nations, and I want to acknowledge the land. Today I'm joined by two friends and special guests, I suppose we're going to introduce them. Björn, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would love to introduce myself, William. Thanks. My name is Björn Jorges. I am a postdoc at the Center for Vision Research at York University, not the one in the UK, the one in Canada, close to Toronto. I study the perception of motion, how we predict motion, and I'm also really into methods. Yeah.
And I'm also joined by Sabrina. So if you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience.
Yes, so thanks for having us here. So I'm Sabrina Hansmann-Roth. I'm now an assistant professor at the University of Iceland, the Icelandic Vision Lab. And I'm mainly working or interested in representations and working memory. I do a bit of ensemble perception, interested in temporal integration, things such as serial dependence, and yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so on our podcast today, we've got a group of vision scientists. And what's fun about this is we, the three of us, met basically through trying to incorporate open science into vision science in a way. So this episode, we'll be talking about what role academic societies might have in the open science movement, and in particular, the ways open science can be promoted or integrated through the conference meetings. And yeah, this is basically how we met, right? Like maybe a few years now. Björn and Sabrina were on the student postgrad committee of the Vision Sciences Society conference meetings. And then I became involved when Björn and Sabrina organized, the pre-registration panel, I think that was. And I noticed, do you want to share a little bit about being on that postgrad committee, like what your responsibilities were, just for a bit of context?
Sure. I think I'll go first because I was on the board first, and obviously Sabrina came. So I was actually on like the first cohort of kind of recruits for this advisory committee. This was started by the board of directors of the Vision Science Society in 2021. I think 2021 was the first meeting. Yeah. And yeah, basically their idea was that they have obviously so many like early career researchers who are part of the society that there should be some kind of like institutionalized way for these younger researchers to make their voice heard. And so basically we're a group of 6 people, and our responsibility was kind of in broad strokes to represent early career researchers in front of the board, in terms of making sure that VSS as a society paid attention to the needs of our community, let's say, which could include some structural changes, but has ended up meaning that we organized lots of events at the following conferences the following years, and that were geared specifically towards early career researchers.
Yeah, very cool. And that's actually what we were all involved in recently in the most recent conference. We organized a pre-data poster session, which I think was pretty successful. Like, how did that idea come about? Because I came into that a little bit later. I think you might have started it, Björn. Where did the motivation and drive come from?
So the kind of the procedure, or like one of the reasons I wanted to be on this advisory committee was that there is, in comparison to other areas of psychology, there is little quantity of open science happening in vision science, which has a bunch of reasons. Some of them are legitimate, others are maybe not. But, you know, every field can benefit from open science. So I really wanted to, during my tenure on this board, I really wanted to kind of create an awareness for open science in my field. And kind of the way I took was, or we took, I wasn't the only one, obviously, was kind of starting out by, across several meetings, starting out more theoretical. We organized, the first year we organized a little kind of discussion of like very theoretical where certain aspects of open science make sense. Then being a bit more concrete last year, where we organized this workshop, where we met you. And now we really wanted to, or like my idea was to like get really into the nitty gritty, organize an event that is, you know, something that the society could really use to kind of implement some of the principles of open science. And that was kind of my motivation behind doing this pre-data collection poster session that we ended up organizing.
Yeah, it was super cool, and that was a really cool thing to be a part of. Sabrina, what happened at our pre-data poster session? What is a pre-data poster session?
Yeah, so the idea of this was basically, I mean, it came, as Björn mentioned, from this years before of starting very broad, then go towards like a pre-registration session that we did and where we met you, well, at least had more personal contact. And then the idea was the poster session that Björn basically pitched to us, since we were already working together on the poster committee, was to have people simply present their next experiment, or at least their next ideas, before having any data collected. So to avoid research waste, to get feedback early on, and maybe there's some confounds in the design that you simply didn't think of, or maybe someone already tried something very similar and has some data in the drawer for something that maybe didn't work, and you put it in the drawer and you let it sit there, but you don't communicate it. So if you present, hey, this is the idea, this is what I want to do, maybe I get some useful feedback before I start data collection, before I even start piloting or something, which will hopefully, you know, reduce research waste, because you start with something that maybe isn't as flawed as some of my first pilots that I sometimes do. So that was basically the idea of that, that people, just present, hey, that's what I want to do, and people just have opinions about that. It's like, hey, maybe have you looked into this and that paper, or this and that study just came out that might be relevant, and just have a friendly conversation over ideas.
Right. It just makes so much more sense, right? Like, a lot of conferences have this requirement where posters need to be, you know, post data collection already, like,
yes,
you've already collected something or made some sort of empirical inference or something. But where feedback would be so much more useful, especially for early career researchers at these conferences, is before they've collected the data. And it makes so much more sense in the sense that you can get feedback and actually change like your design, or improve your design, or address some things that you don't like before you've invested all these resources collecting the data, or after you've written it up and submitted as manuscript, and the review comes back and like, wait, haven't you thought about this? And you know, you're now in this position where you've done all this data collection and you want to output something, but like you've now got to address concerns that you've got to do a whole bunch of things to try and address the reviewer's concerns again. So it made so much more sense. And it was pretty fun presenting, because I also, as I organized, also had an idea in the poster, and I got a lot of good feedback. People were interested, and I got like inspired or excited because people were coming up and being like, yeah, that's a good idea, can't wait to see what's gonna happen, or yeah, that's like, it's a very clever design, and so on and so forth, or yeah, like I've tried something similar, so I'm curious what you'll find. Like, those were the kind of conversations at the pre-data poster session of ours, and yeah, it was really awesome.
Yeah, I think it's also very, especially for early career researchers, but also for people that are in labs that are rather small, or you feel like, hey, I'm doing my PhD and everyone else in the lab is doing something completely different. So I'm maybe not getting that much feedback compared to people who are at bigger universities, bigger labs and so on, where they have big lab meetings and they are provided with a lot of feedback. And also how I sometimes advertise it to people, maybe you also find your future collaborator, because you might be doing something similar, or you do have some similar ideas. Why not put like some people together and do stuff, work on projects together? That also reduces, you don't have people doing stuff in parallel, not knowing of each other, but maybe pull the resources together and collaborate with some people. Like this might hopefully also happen to some of those attendees in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense. Like on that collaboration angle, it also sort of beyond just it equalizes the landscape, because now if you find a collaborator instead of a competitor, like rather than competing in parallel and trying to get to the finish line first with this project, now you find a collaborator and you work on it together and can actually make progress on whatever field, because you both converge on an idea or a perspective. And so like that just seems to equalize the field and make science a little bit more friendly, a little bit more productive, I would say, and sort of remove some of these weird incentives of publishing as fast as you can, for example.
Yeah, it really moves, or like the kind of the vibe behind the session is really more collaborative, rather than this kind of adversarial view of science that we're trying to leave in the past with many of our open science initiatives as well.
Yeah. So and we're hoping to run future sessions, pre-data sessions, in a way, try and integrate it into the conference, right?
Fingers crossed. We're currently talking with all the kind of stakeholders at the society on the board of directors within like this group of like open science defenders in vision science, to see how we proceed in future years. Because like while the session was definitely a great success, there were a couple of things that we can definitely improve in future years. For example, we didn't receive too many submissions of posters for probably a variety of reasons. Some people told us that they hadn't heard about it. It was the first year that we did this, so I think it makes sense that people weren't necessarily super aware. And then we're all scientists, we're all like teaching, we're doing so many things. So doing kind of a second poster, having a second presentation at a conference is just added work that you might not want to commit to. So we're currently working on ironing out some of these kinks to in order for more people to participate in this sort of event.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
That's a good segue into our next segment, the main course of our podcast episode, which is talking about what the roles of academic societies and conferences may be in the open science movement, and sort of getting both of your perspectives in how that might work, or what your drive behind that is, because both of you have been part of the push for open science through conferences and through the Vision Science Society and stuff too. So I guess my question is, like, do you think the academic societies have like a greater role to play in like trying to like integrate open science across the field and try and support scientists in this way? Like, what is your perspective behind that? Because I don't think academic societies are thought of as the first place to try and like initiate these kind of reforms. Like people think about in the lab or in a department of an institution, but not necessarily the societies or the conference. So, yeah, what's your kind of perspective on that?
That's an excellent question. Okay, I'll go first. With very vague thoughts. the thing with I feel with academic societies is that I feel often they struggle to kind of find their role in the academic world beyond organizing their conferences. So I remember that this has been a discussion for VSS as well, and be like, okay, how do we make the society helpful or like relevant throughout the year, beyond just organizing this 1 week of the meeting per year. So I think this is definitely something where societies that want to take kind of a bigger role in their field and be like, visionary and advance the field, can shine a bit, because they do have, they occupy a big, they're often very prestigious. They occupy a lot of like mind space in their members' kind of mental landscape. So if a society is really like, okay, we're going to push for science reform in our field, then I feel like that could reach a lot of members. And maybe with like the history of these societies, maybe they also have a special role in reaching more senior academics who are often a bit more resistant to kind of these reform efforts. Yeah, I don't know. This is, as I said, vague thoughts. Maybe Sabrina has something more concrete.
No, I think I'm very similar with that being kind of vague. I think they should take up a role beyond the pure organization of things, but I also sometimes struggle with like thinking, how can they do that? Because I think it is to some extent what we try to do with the SPC, right? That was the first attempt to go a bit beyond. We meet, we have the posters, we have the talk sessions, but on top of that, we have other events that are not directly on the science per se, but everything that surrounds the science, how we publish, how we do things, how we teach, how we try to be more inclusive and not the science per se. I talk about, this was my last study, or this is what we found. So I think they should take up that role. But I do agree that, the idea of Björn, that there's sometimes this trying to reach the more senior academics, especially when it comes to open science, and I don't want to put them all in the same box and say they are reluctant to move towards that. But still there is sometimes this gap when you also look at the events that are organized, who visits them, like who was at our pre-data session. It looked more like, okay, it was a lot of PhDs and postdocs and their colleagues and friends and so on. So I hope that repeatedly bringing those things to the board, as well, we are not on the SPC anymore, but as the SPC alumni still trying to do something, having that repeatedly on their table might actually on the long run kind of put some changes forward. And then when it goes back from that, it's also maybe this also pushes forward then, or this goes back to universities, like hiring processes, like open science and all these initiatives that you do, they take up some time, but how much are they valued when deciding whether you get tenured? So maybe also there's a way of this, if the societies are more and more involved in those activities, maybe this also pushes back to the universities and how things work there, hopefully. But maybe this is just a overly optimistic dream. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there. Because like on a bit of a more abstract level, I'm always a big fan of trying to solve structural problems, not on the individual level, but like on a structural institutional level. And I think the thing with science is that the institutional level is very, there's not like one kind of political organizing structure. There is like several kind of structures that kind of coexist on the same level, on different levels, hierarchical or not. So I guess whatever we can do on any of these levels of organization or structure, this is really just rephrasing what Sabrina said, but whatever we can change on one of these levels might then have these ripple effects on other levels as well. So we should really try to push for what we want, what we think should be science reform on all the levels that we can reach or that we can use.
Yeah, it makes sense that changes can feed forward into each other, like procedural changes can feed forward into structural changes, can feed forward to changes in the community. The Framework for Open and Reproducible Research Training just released a really good paper about saying how the credibility revolution has created positive change. I think the first author is Max Korbmacher, so that's a great paper. But it's exactly reiterating your point that like changes at different levels can feed forward to the other levels, and you can start to get momentum. And that is also my theory of change for the open science movement. Like, it's not going to be from the inside out, if that makes sense. We need change happening in parallel across all the different levels to try and like build this movement, right? To energize this change. And another point is that, as you said, institutions like departments as they're set up are usually pretty siloed. So like, in fact, I think universities, when they're hiring, generally don't hire people from the same subdomain, if that makes sense. Like, you don't want people too close in expertise because you've got to cover the courses that you teach to your graduates or your undergraduates. So you need a breadth of course. So generally hiring doesn't happen where you really focusing in on a specific topic, let's say, generally. So now you've got these silos, right, within your department. And so your possibility for changes have to cover many, many domains and many, many types of research and many different like levels of people. So it's a bit harder to get those reforms to really stick. But academic societies and their relevant associated conferences, you've controlled for that variance. you've controlled for that covariate. You've got everyone who's within a very similar field. Like, sure, there are subdomains within that field, but everyone's pretty like close together, right? So now you can initiate reforms that can be a bit more direct and specific to those subdomains, which you might not be able to do at an institutional level or at a, let's say, nation state level with grants or whatnot. So yeah, I've always
just a quick interjection. I think that's really important because different areas or sub areas in science might need or might benefit more or less from certain practices in open science, or might have different problems or like barriers to, for example, replicability and some such.
Yeah, I think you mentioned like vision science didn't really have this open science bent for quite a while, and I think there were very many factors in that like led to that, which leads to unique issues or unique situations for our field that require probably unique solutions, not blanket solutions from elsewhere. So for example, vision scientists, let's say psychophysics, like we usually deal with huge effect sizes, and we usually deal with so like generally it's going to be like 5 subjects for, I don't know, 100,000 of trials. And then so there's less of a like need. People are like, yeah, you can just like see the effect. But when people this is sort of a broad generalization, but with those conditions, it's very easy to like not be rigorous about certain things, like not be rigorous about the transparency or the of the data or the methods. So it's very hard to replicate the experiment just from the paper, let's say, or like hidden expertise about certain things that aren't revealed, so that when people go to the paper or hear about it, they're just unclear about what's going on and they just miss the context and the metadata, let's say, around the experiment and things like that. So that like it's one example of a unique situation for vision. Maybe not so unique, but like very common in the vision science field that maybe we could try and address, like saying, hey, let's be a bit more collaborative with our methods and our equipment. Let's try and be a bit more transparent with our reporting and so on and so forth. How do you think conferences might be a good venue for that, because most of your initiatives have been across multiple conferences, right? So we tried, the first one was like an open science panel, and then the second one was pre-registration and like a Q&A panel on pre-registration, and then like a sort of tutorial on that, I think. And then we had this pre-data poster session. Do you see conferences as a really good venue for these kind of pushing these kind of initiatives out?
I mean, I definitely think so, because that's the moment when we're all together, right? That's when we have this intensive week together. So I think it is definitely one of the places. There are many places. I mean, there are also many initiatives within universities on open science and so on. But I think at the conferences you really reach a quite diverse community from very different places. So I definitely think, where else? I mean, we talked about these changes, like where do you start? At the university, on the university level, the lab level, the department level, or at these conferences. So it's definitely one of the locations, I think, where we have to start. And so with these different events that you just mentioned, the more global symposium that Björn was involved in, and the pre-registration session we did, and the poster and so on, that's one aspect. And I do feel like currently, at least from the discussion we have about continuing this, there seems to be like a momentum. Like I really feel like we shouldn't stop now. And this is really the feeling I had immediately after the poster session. I was like, okay, we have to do this again. This is the right moment, and we shouldn't stop if we want to push further. So no, I think the conference is one of the right places. But now what I want to see is, okay, it's these events are important, but now I think the next step is to get this into the conference. Like I remember that we were discussing these open science badges. I'm not sure how well this will work and so on. But now I would actually like to see a more long-term change at conferences, such as, for example, this long-term implementation of this pre-data satellite. Let it not be a satellite then, but an actual event at the conference. But now I would actually like to see the long-term changes of those events that we started having. Like we tried to start a discussion, at least at this conference. Now the next step is how, like, I want to see this now being something regular. But I'm also still wondering what is the best way to go. But yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think, like, taking it back to a point from before, we were talking about how, like, sometimes the senior academics or the board are maybe like a bit hesitant for change, and like this change in the conference came from early career researchers when we were all postdocs. So like it's one part energy to push for the change, but I think another part openness to change and openness to receive the changes. And I think with time, the people who are governing the conference or the society kind of, if they're open to those ideas, they receive them, and it gives us a real opportunity to implement changes that are sustainable and accessible for the rest of the conference. And I think that's really exciting. So, like, for example, like now thanks to your work trying to advocate and promote open science at the Vision Science conferences, there's now an eye towards trying to see if we can promote it in the actual conference itself through things like open science badges, or relaxing certain policies like having the data, having to have that collected before the poster is presented, or even shifting the sort of makeup of the conference in terms of its symposiums or its satellites. Like another really cool satellite that's sort of now more permanent at the Vision Sciences conference meeting is the Philosophy of Vision satellite, which is a really, really interesting and important part of science, I think, which is like, philosophy and theory, thinking about theory and sort of becoming eye to eye on our way of progress, or way of scientific progress, and definitions and like inference and things like that. Like, it's all really important. So hopefully with time the conferences do sort of take those those changes on. Yeah, I don't want to keep banging on about senior academics, but like I think one thing that helped our pre-data poster session was we did have a few sort of, let's say, notable PIs in our field kind of come by and sort of like be part of the feedback and give support and, you know, ask their students to present at the pre-data poster. So they're like, I think that's really important. So it's not just having energy behind the initiative and the idea and the creativity to try and make these reforms, but also people you don't have to be part of those two things, but you do have to be open and willing to support these things. And I think there were in part of the momentum that you're talking about, people are starting to want to like be part of it or to get involved or like just popping their head and curious and seeing what's it about. I think that there was a real momentum there at our recent try with the pre-data poster session.
Speaking about senior academics, I think we have to like really say that in this case, I feel we had a lot of support from the senior academics, like in the VSS leadership, especially like Jody Calhoun, who was the president, the director, or the president of VSS last year. She was very interested in making this happen. She was like, from the beginning, she was like, okay, maybe this is a pilot. Maybe this is something we want to integrate in kind of the main conference, or like make it part of the society's fabric. So what the point I'm trying to make here is that often kind of this inertia from senior academics, from kind of people in these leadership positions, is really not in opposition to reform, but often it's just they're way too fucking busy. I don't know if I can swear, but
yeah, go ahead.
but these people are they're a lot of them are juggling so many responsibilities, teaching their students and so on, that I feel many times they appreciate a lot when you come to them with an idea and you're like, okay, I want to do this. I have this idea. Here's like a little abstract. This is what I want to do. This is why I think it's important. I don't really need any like work from you. I'm willing to put in the hours myself. I'm going to do the organizing myself. I just need kind of your green light. I just need your kind of institutional support to make this happen. And I feel for a lot of like people in these leadership positions, they're really like receptive to that, because they know sort of that, you know, some reform is needed. We need more open science stuff, but they just don't have the it's maybe not on their radar, and also they just don't have the time or like the
capacity.
Kind of the space, the capacity. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think, but once they give the green light, the sort of they add credibility to whatever we're trying, which is a kind of a nice thing to have. Because I think with initiatives, like, you could imagine a world where they weren't green lighting you for these changes or these initiatives, and so now it's more, even if it's like, I don't think it's a bad idea, but there's still a resistance there if they're not really like adding credibility and not like green lighting it. And that could be a bit of a barrier to trying to get things. But here we've experienced that, senior academics have been sort of receptive and being like, yeah, this is a great idea, and like adding to the field rather than like sort of just standing back, which is great. Do you think there should be one thing I worry about a lot is that actually there's two things I'm worrying about right now. One is that often early career researchers are doing a lot of the like groundwork for this kind of stuff, and I worry about that. And then I think the second thing I'm worried about, which can possibly offset that, is being like giving them more recognition or giving them some sort of reward for doing this kind of work, which has traditionally not been recognized, at least in terms of the more meaningful things like, let's say, research assessment for jobs, awards, grants, so forth. Yeah, do you both have any perspectives behind that?
Yeah, no, I mean,
roles of early career researchers?
Yeah, no, I do agree. And this is also what I said before, you do all of that. And then hopefully this ripples back to the university and how they hire and how they, I wouldn't say judge you, but this is basically maybe also part of your work. It's not just the research and the teaching and the admin that you do. By admin, I mean like department meetings. I don't mean these initiatives such as, these open science initiatives and things that you organize at conferences. But if that would get recognized, then all the time and the investment that especially the early career researchers put into that, gives them at least some reward. And it's not something you do outside of your work, or it's like, okay, if I do that, if I organize this and that, it takes that much time, so I have to put my writing papers onto the weekend in order to get everything done. So that this needs to be also then a change, not just in the societies and conferences, but also within the institutions like universities and so on. I hope that happens. I mean, you see it a bit when I was applying for jobs. I see a bit of that. At least I didn't apply everywhere in the world, so I can only speak for the countries that I have applied to. But I did see it sometimes that people were asking about that, or there was something in the application where I should speak a bit more about my, initiatives and things I do outside. This is my research and this is what I can teach. So it's happening a bit, but obviously those things are very slow. But I also know that here, like for me, for example, in order to get tenure, it's the research. I get evaluated every year with points, and I do get points on outreach and all of that. But only the points on research are the ones that count in 4 years. That's the next big challenge, I guess. To have also changes there, because it motivates people then to do something also, because you feel you get at least a bit of reward or acknowledgement for those things. I mean, it is a lot of fun. Like I met a lot of people and it is super interesting, and if you're into that, you also do it without the acknowledgement, but I think it would also boost those initiatives.
Just as a little hopeful anecdote, I recently applied for a scholarship in Spain, and the way the application was structured is kind of that the main part was, pick 10 things you've done in your career that like highlight you as a scientist, and that could be anything from specifically academic projects over courses that you've developed or taught to kind of community stuff or like organizing things like, for example, these open science initiatives. So I guess change is happening slowly in some places.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think, I agree with you. This is kind of something I've observed too, that there's been a bit more, like, in applications, like a bit more of an ask for, like, what do you think about open science? Or maybe not even just open science, just like improving science or structures and like things beyond just research. To put it in a more broader category, I would call it like service. Like I think traditionally in the field, people have thought of service as like peer review or being on the editorial board of a journal, but not really thinking about the like community building aspects or the like, push to improve science in different ways, these kind of initiatives and that kind of work, that kind of impactful work, right? Another bent to that is like people who create, open databases or organize conferences, right? Like yourselves, like that's, I would say, a big service to the community that the science wouldn't be able to function without, right? Which, I mean, this is a good segue to the next sort of segment, which is what we call the delectable desserts, which is the idea that we try and reveal a hidden curriculum item or a tip for our early career audience. And I think the perfect one for today, as we've already kind of circled around, is getting involved in conference organization, or getting involved in societies, especially as an early career researcher. Sabrina, I think you mentioned you meeting the people like who are interested in the same things you were. Is that kind of what motivated you to get into organizing, like being part of the organizing committee?
So I was, what was I, the second cohort, right? You had started Björn a year before me. And then I remember it was just advertised, and then I looked a bit at what they were currently doing. So it was just like a gut feeling. I want to be involved in that. There are things that I would like to, changes I'd like to see at conferences, but it doesn't help complaining about it. It's like, oh, I don't like that. But then do something. Like it is, that's just what it is. So I just applied, and I didn't regret it. I really enjoyed it. I was even sad that I had to leave a year earlier than initially planned, because I wanted to stay on it. But it was also kind of interesting to see how conferences work, like in the background. Like you normally attend, you hang your poster, you meet people, but the entire organization, I mean, sometimes also like the struggles and so on. I think it is very interesting to see that a bit. And if you want to see changes, then be a part of that. And it was fairly easy application. Like it wasn't that difficult to do. And it's just and I did meet a lot of people. I got ideas, and even when we were doing the pre-registration session, I still learned a lot. I was like, oh, I didn't think I could do that. I thought, oh, experiment 1 wasn't pre-registered, so I can't do it with experiment 2. Like all these like simple things that I sometimes also forget or wasn't aware of. So I did learn a lot, and I also felt like, okay, I want to be part of some sort of change early on as an early career researcher. And I did really, really enjoy it. And now it's actually, because Björn and me are both not on the SPC anymore, but we keep on doing stuff. So it feels like the alumni are now moving over to kind of like continuing outside the SPC with their efforts. And that is definitely something really nice. And I met you all. That was great. Looking forward to the next time. But yeah, no, I think it is... If you are interested in that, then get involved. It's not gonna hurt. It's gonna be awesome. I'm sure.
And getting involved is probably easier than you think. Like as I said earlier, people who want to do stuff are usually appreciated and are supported in general. So if you're like, okay, I want to get involved, I want to make this conference or whatever better in this sense, then reach out to someone in charge, and more likely than not, I think they'll be receptive. Be it like in a more like institutional way, as we were on the student postdoc committee, or just informally.
Yeah, sometimes all it takes is an ask, right? You just ask someone or something. Like maybe at your society or your conferences, there's no postgrad or early career support yet, or like committee, but maybe if you ask, there's going to be an eye to creating one. Or if you want to be more specific about pushing for something, then simply ask the governing board, the board of directors of your conference or your society, see if that change can be made. And doing that is pretty rewarding. It's been rewarding for all of us, I guess, this kind of advocating work. And then also, I guess, going back to if we see these kind of efforts being more recognized and more valued, this could really help you in the long term in, like, talking about your service to the community and things like that. Does that sound great to you all? Does that sound right?
It sounds right. It sounds right for sure. And it's not only like this kind of CV wise recognition. It's also that just by organizing things, you meet so many people. So especially for people like I, for example, I just don't like talking to random people that I don't know. I'm like, okay, this is going to be boring. Just going to jump at this person and be like, hey, I'm Björn, let's talk. No, but like if you organize something usually organize it with a group of people, more people are involved. So if you are struggling with networking, this is a really good like side effect of organizing something, that you just meet people and then you have a foot in. This person is reasonable. If I see them on the hallway, I will stop to talk to them.
Yeah, that's great. that was great. I hope our audience got a lot about that. So the message is, open science changes are happening. There is momentum. Get involved. You'll get a lot out of it. People are receptive. Yeah, get involved. Get amongst it. So I guess let the audience know where they can follow you or find you if they're interested in chatting with you more. Björn, where can people find you, follow you?
My answer would have been Twitter. It still is Twitter, but who knows for how long Twitter still exists. So my Twitter handle is B_Jorges, Jorges. And I guess that's the main way to get in touch with me. Yeah,
and Sabrina?
Yeah, same for me. And now I'm wondering, what is my Twitter handle? I think it is Hansmann_Roth, so ROTH. I also, if you just Google my name, you also find my website and there's like my email address.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everyone.